The Treaty of Fire and Stars. The council chamber floated in silence across the dark expanse of Sector 9 as stars blinked coldly beyond the transparent dome above. Delegates from 20 species sat in a semicircle, their faces lit by the blue glow of the data rings that pulsed from the central table. In the middle stood a human ambassador, alone, silent, calm. The Zarn High Marshal broke the silence with a sneer on his face, his voice a low growl through sharpened teeth. You bring no weapons, no threats, and yet you claim a seat among warriors of the galaxy. Tell us, human, why do your kind never go to war, eh? Few chuckles rose from the Bariac side, their long necks twisting like vines, amused by the question. Others leaned forward, curious, knowing that humans had once been feared, but now chose silence in galactic conflicts. The human ambassador, whose nameplate simply read Yalan of Earth, remained still. His eyes scanned the room slowly, not with fear, but with something else older, heavier. He finally spoke, not with arrogance, but with the calm weight of truth. We made a promise, Yalan said softly, and that promise was written not with ink, but with fire. The lights in the chamber dimmed and a projection shimmered above the table. It showed Earth not as it was now, but as it had been: cities burning, skies blackened, oceans boiling. A war not fought in space, but across continents, with weapons that turned time itself into an enemy. This was our last war, Yalan continued. It was called the Final Divide. It did not end with victory. It ended with silence, with a sky so quiet we could hear our hearts break. The Zarn Marshal scoffed. What weakness makes a species fear its own strength? Jound his gaze directly at him, and for a moment the room went still. You misunderstand. We do not fear our strength. We fear the thing inside us that awakens when we use it. The projection shifted, now showing something else. A field where nothing moved. Ash covered the ground, not a single voice, not a single cry. The screen zoomed in to show a soldier, not much older than a child, holding something glowing in their hands. The device pulsed once, then darkness. The Bariax delegate leaned forward. You erased yourself. Aslin nodded. No, the war stopped before that, but not before we understood the full price of continuing. A murmur rolled through the chamber. Some laughed nervously. Others looked at each other, eyes wide. Then Yalan said something that silenced even the skeptics. We won that war by becoming monsters, and we made a vow to bury those monsters so deep that even we could not reach them again. Suddenly, a voice from the back hissed out. It was a young Grolac tactician, curious and foolish. Then why claim a seat at this table if you refuse to fight? Yalan did not blink. Because when the stars burn and peace fails, and the galaxy stands at the edge, we are the last ones you want to awaken. He raised one hand and a holographic seal appeared above it, rotating slowly. A symbol burned into memory by every historian across the stars. It was the Treaty of Fire and Stars, the ancient pact that ended the Sector 9 wars, signed by every major power, and one unknown species, Earth. You called this council to demand our help in your upcoming war, Yalan said quietly. But hear this warning. We do not go to war lightly, and if we do, the fire we bring cannot be undone. A cold silence took hold, this time deeper, thicker. Realization spread like ice through the veins of those present. The laughter died, the scoffs turned to glances, and the arrogance turned to questions. Yalan stepped back, not in retreat, but with finality. He had given them a choice, the kind that came once in 1,000 years. You asked why we do not go to war, Yalan said, as he turned to leave. It is not because we cannot. It is because we know what happens when we don't. With that he exited, leaving a room full of warriors who for the first time understood that the most dangerous weapon is not the one you use, but the one you choose to bury. The stars beyond the dome shimmered again, distant and eternal, as the chamber fell into silence, broken only by the soft hum of a forgotten warning. Last war that ended everything. The human ambassador walked out of the council chamber, but his words stayed behind, floating in the cold space between those who once believed Earth to be irrelevant and now wondered what kind of silence could be powerful enough to shake empires. A murmur spread through the stations orbiting Polaris Station 2, where the council had met. News travels fast among warlords, and faster still among those who fear what they cannot understand back. On Earth, buried beneath the surface of Greenland, in a vault sealed by codes passed through generations, an old man sat alone watching the same hologram Yalin had shared at the council. His eyes were tired, his hands weathered by time, but the memory behind those eyes burned bright like the day it was carved into his soul. He remembered the last war. Not from books, not from records, but from living it. The world had torn itself apart in that war, over power, over fear, over pride. Nations unleashed weapons that bent the rules of physics, engineered plagues that only spared their own genetically, marked populations and fired lasers from the sky until the oceans boiled and the winds screamed across continents. Had been a soldier once, not by choice, but by draft, a teenager sent to fight for soil that no longer grew food for people who no longer trusted each other. He had watched cities vanish not just from maps but from memory, entire cultures erased in minutes. Their language, their songs, their hope. The worst was not the weapons or the loss, it was what they became to survive. He had led a mission once into a bunker, said to hold an enemy general. Instead they found civilians used as shields strapped with devices that recorded terror. He remembered stepping through the ashes of children, not even knowing their names, and feeling something break in his chest. After that mission, he removed his badge, burned his uniform, and walked away into exile. It was in the ruins of that broken Earth that the leaders came together, not from victory, not from strength, but from exhaustion. They met on shattered land under skies still red from flame. They laid down what little they had left and said no more. The treaty was not a celebration. It was a funeral, a burial of weapons of hatred, of the idea that any war could be worth the cost. Vault in Greenland was built afterward as a reminder not of power, but of the memory of what they had done, what they had become, and the oath that it would never happen again. Inside it lay artifacts from the war, technology forbidden by every charter ever written, machines that could collapse suns, viruses that could target emotion, itself drones that could rewrite the mind, and even one device that no longer had a name, only a label. Do not ACTV. Back at the Galactic Council, the delegates watched the projection of Earth's vault with growing unease. The Czarn Marshal, who once scoffed, now leaned back in his seat, his claws tapping nervously on metal. The Bariax diplomat closed her second set of eyes, an instinct she only used when witnessing a death ritual. Yalin stood before them again, called back by request, this time not to be questioned, but to explain. You do not understand, Yalin said, because your wars are still young. Your pain has not yet reached its deepest layer. You still believe victory can erase suffering. He touched the panel, and it displayed Earth now. Blue oceans, clean air, forests, reborn cities. No longer walled, but open, flowing with life and shared creation. We have peace not because we disarmed, but because we learned how to fear ourselves. One delegate, a quiet scholar from the Yuvani people, spoke for the first time. Her voice trembled with something between awe and sorrow. If you have such knowledge, why not destroy it? Yalin looked at her with gentle eyes. Because destruction is easy. Memory is harder. We chose to remember not just for us, but for youth. Projection shifted to show a monument built in the middle of the African continent. It bore no names, only a single line carved in 100 languages. It read, "We went to war and came back as strangers to ourselves." The silence in the chamber was complete. Now not even the humming lights dared interrupt. You ask why humans do not fight, Yalin said again, raising his voice. Because we already fought the last war, and we lost something that cannot be rebuilt. Some looked away, unable to hold his gaze. Some nodded slowly, as if something deep inside them now understood. But one delegate, the same Grolak tactician from before, still young, still restless, stood again and said, "If you truly regret war, why do you keep your weapons?" Yalin stepped closer, his face unreadable. "We keep them not to use, but to show what we once were, so that we never forget what happens when silence breaks." The chamber dimmed again as the session ended, but the tension did not leave. The seeds had been planted not of fear, but of thought, and thought once awakened does not sleep easily. The hidden weapon humanity buried. The Grolak tactician stood in the corridor outside. The council chamber, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of Earth's vault, his thoughts spinning faster than the stars beyond the windows. His name was Rennick, young by galactic standards and shaped by a culture that worshipped conquest. He had never known a war he feared, never met a warrior he admired until now. Rennick had studied military doctrines across galaxies, read scrolls of ancient wars engraved in crystal, learned from generals whose names were etched into planets, but none of it prepared him for the story the human ambassador had just revealed, and yet a part of him refused to accept it, completely refused to believe that a species as fragile as humans could be so feared without proof. He made a request to the council, a rare motion to observe Earth firsthand, to see the vault with his own eyes, and the council surprisingly approved, perhaps driven by their own need to understand what humanity had locked away. Earth agreed. Under strict conditions, Rennick would travel alone, he would be unarmed, and he would be accompanied by a keeper of the vault, an old man named Elias, whose voice sounded like dry wind over bones. The journey took only hours, but Rennick felt the weight of centuries. As their transport descended into the icy wasteland of northern Greenland, the wind howled like the voices of a forgotten war, the sky gray and heavy, the land untouched and cold, as if the planet itself had turned its back on that place. They arrived at a door embedded in stone, no markings, no technology visible, just a slab of metal taller than 10 men. Elias placed his palm on a panel hidden beneath the ice, and slowly the door sank into the ground, revealing a stairwell that led into darkness. No lights guided their path, only the distant hum of power that felt like the heartbeat of something ancient. Rennick followed Elias without question, though every instinct in him screamed that this place was wrong, not evil, not hostile, just wrong, like something that should not exist. They reached the chamber, and it opened like the inside of a planet, vast, circular, lined with objects covered in tarps and sealed glass. One by one, Elias showed him fragments of humanity's past, drones that floated without sound, waiting for orders. No one would dare give, helmets that scanned for moral weakness and activated if none was found, syringes filled with liquid AI, capable of rewriting loyalty in a heartbeat. And then they reached the center where no light touched, and Elias stopped. "Here lies the final weapon," he said softly. "Even we do not know its name, only that it was created during the last days and sealed without ever being used." Rennick stared at the object. It was simple, a black cube resting on a pedestal with no lights, no energy signature, no sound. But around it, the air felt thinner, as if it consumed breath and thought and courage. "What does it do?" Rennick asked. Elias shook his head, and for the first time the old keeper's voice trembled. "We do not know, but we know what it cost to build. Every record of its creation was erased. Every scientist vanished. Every file burned, and yet the people who built it left one message carved into the walls of this chamber." Rennick looked at the stone and saw words written in old Earth tongue, translated by the implants in his brain. "If we open this, we have already lost." He felt a chill, not from the cold, but from something deeper, as if the cube watched, and not with eyes but with judgment. "Why not destroy it?" he asked again, needing to understand. "Because," Elias said, "if we destroy it, we forget that we were once willing to build it, and forgetting is how it begins again." They left the vault in silence, Rennick speaking no more, and Elias offering no comfort. As they returned to the council, Rennick changed his report. He no longer called humans weak or dramatic. He called them something else. Rennick addressed the council with new eyes and a changed heart. "I saw the weapon, and I understood humanity does not go to war, not because they fear others, but because they fear what they themselves are capable of becoming." Paused, looking around the chamber, filled with those who had once mocked Earth and now listened like children before fire. They buried their monster, not because it was defeated, but because they knew it would win. The room did not cheer, did not question. For the first time they only listened, and somewhere on Earth beneath the ice, the cube sat still and waiting, a silent reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one you never use. The predator within the peacekeeper, far across the edge of the Orion line. The galaxy began to burn again, not in slow sparks of political conflict, but in the brutal fire of invasion. A new Threat emerged not from the known empires, not from ancient rivals, but from a species unrecorded, unknown, unseen until now. They did not speak. They did not negotiate. They devoured. They were called the Relentless, and they came without warning from beyond the black veil of deep space, moving like shadows and hunger. Within 7 days they consumed 3 systems, turning cities into graveyards and planets into silence. The Bariaks screamed for help. The Zarn prepared to retaliate, but their fleets vanished without trace. The council scrambled, the galaxy trembled, and every warrior from every empire knew the same truth. If this was not stopped, nothing would remain. A desperate call was sent to Earth, not with arrogance this time, but with pleading. Hands and shaking voices, the message was simple. We need youth. Council met again this time, not in debate, but in fear. The Relentless moved with a kind of intelligence that could not be measured. They bypassed defense grids, hijacked comms, turned all eyes against each other using a type of psychic warfare never seen before. They did not conquer. They erased when Yalan of Earth returned to the chamber. His face was grim, and still the same silence followed him. But this time it was not out of mockery. It was out of need. You understand what you are asking, he said calmly. You are asking us to unleash the thing we buried. The Zarn Marshal stood, and this time his voice held no pride. Only survival. If we do not survive, there's nothing left to protect. Ajilin nodded once and said, send your strongest, send your elite. We will meet you in the Kuros Belt, and there we will stop the storm. What arrived in the Kuros Belt was not an army of Earth. It was a single vessel, black smooth, without weapons visible. Its name was Solace, and it carried only 30 humans among them, a group called the Echoes. The Echoes were not soldiers. They were something older. They wore suits that pulsed with memory, eyes that reflected wars not recorded in books. They stepped onto the alien battlefield without fanfare, and the galaxy watched them in silence. The Relentless struck hard and fast, their ships organic and grotesque, their tactics brutal and precise. The combined fleets of the galaxy fought with all they had and still fell back. But when the Echoes moved, everything changed. They did not shout, they did not signal. They simply moved through the wreckage with focus that felt unreal. One Echo touched the hull of a dying cruiser, and the entire ship pulsed with new light. Repaired by nanites older than the council itself, another walked into a burning station and came out alone, dragging 20 survivors, wrapped in shields of blue light. But it was not their tech that made them feared. It was the look in their eyes. When they faced the Relentless, pure emotionless fury, not rage, not hate, just precision. A kind of terrifying stillness that said, this is not vengeance. This is balance. Irenic, the Grolic tactician who once questioned them, now stood at the edge of a cruiser, watching as one Echo faced a creature twice his size with claws sharper than light. The human did not dodge, did not block. He simply stepped forward, placed a hand on the beast, and whispered something the translation implants could not catch. Beast stopped and then crumbled into ash. How did you do that? Rennick asked later, trembling, not from cold, but from truth. Echo turned to him and said quietly, we studied war until we became it, and then we chose to forget. Now you have asked us to remember. Hours passed, the tide turned, the Relentless fell back, but not before the galaxy saw what it meant for humans to return to war, not as conquerors, but as something worse, as the quiet hand that ends storms by becoming one. The battlefield was one not with numbers but with memory, with the weapon humans had buried in their blood, in their minds, in their silence. When the last of the Relentless ships retreated beyond known space, the council hailed it as victory, but Earth did not celebrate on the cruiser. Solace Yalan sat with the Echoes, eyes heavy, voice low. We told them this would happen, and still they asked, and now they have seen one. Echo replied without looking up, they will never ask again. Jilin looked at the stars, not with wonder, but with warning, and said quietly, then our silence must return before the galaxy forgets again, the fear that shakes empires. The buyers. War was over, but peace did not return in joy, it returned in silence. A heavy, trembling silence that hung over every system like a thick, invisible fog. The stars looked the same, but those who had seen the humans fight knew something fundamental had changed. The fear was not of the Relentless, who now hid in the corners of uncharted space. It was of Earth, and what Earth had chosen to reveal. The echoes disappeared after the battle. No farewells, no medals, no speeches. Their ship's solace vanished into the folds of solar storms and encrypted space. Lanes not even the council could track it. Their absence spoke louder than their actions. And for some, that absence was more terrifying than the battle itself. Renek sat in his quarters aboard the Galactic flagship, replaying the footage of the human named Kai, the one who had turned an Relentless commander to ash. With a whisper, he had slowed it down to each frame, studied the movements, the heat signatures, the psi energy pulses, and still he found no weapon, no explanation, no science that made sense. Had fought in over 20 campaigns, survived ambush, assassinations, chemical barrages. He had laughed at pain and mocked fear, but now he could not sleep, not without seeing those eyes again. The echoes with eyes that held no hate, only cold memory, and something worse than rage. Acceptance. The council tried to return to order. Resolutions were passed, committees reformed, aid delivered to damaged worlds, but no one asked Earth to lead, and no one dared invite them again to the war table. They were thanked, praised, respected, even admired, but never touched. Not anymore. The Czar Marshal, once proud, now woke in the middle of his sleep cycle, hands shaking from dreams of humans, walking through fire without blinking. He issued new orders to his fleet: no engagement with Earth vessels without full diplomatic clearance, and no combat drills within 6 sectors of Terran space. The Bariax diplomat, whose culture once saw humans as poetic weaklings, now taught their children a new song, a lullaby about fire wrapped in flesh, about silence that can burn, and about a blue planet where gods had learned to fear themselves. A summit was called weeks later. A new treaty proposed to prevent any galactic conflict from reaching the levels witnessed during the Relentless War. Every species attended, but Earth did not send a representative. Instead, they sent a recording, a simple message played in front of the entire council. The image showed Yalan seated in front of a quiet Earth landscape, birds flying over a rebuilt city filled with life. He spoke slowly, not with emotion, but with deep, unshakable finality. We came when you called, not because we wished to fight, but because we knew you would not survive alone. We warned you what it would cost, and you saw it. You saw who we were before we chose peace, and now you must decide who you will become. He looked into the camera, and for a second, it felt like he looked into every soul watching. Do not thank us, and do not fear us. We are not your saviors, we are your warning. The message ended, the screen went dark, and the room remained still for nearly 10 minutes. No one spoke, not even the council chair, because there was nothing left to say. Whispers began to rise across the stars. Stories passed in hushed tones in military halls, in diplomatic rooms, in secret bunkers. Humans do not go to war, because when they do, they change the battlefield into a mirror and force everyone to see what lies beneath the skin of strategy and power. One report leaked from a scientific observatory near the Terran border showed strange readings in deep space: gravitational shifts, light distortions, signs that something large had moved into a hidden orbit. Some said it was the echoes returning. Some said it was a fail-safe. Some said it was Earth reminding the stars that silence is not absence, but a choice. Renek finally returned home, a hero to some but hollow inside. He stepped onto the soil of his planet and felt smaller than ever, not because his world was weak, but because he now knew strength was not loud, it was quiet and deeply buried. He visited a monument built in memory of the Relentless conflict, names etched in stone, and among them was one unfamiliar to most, but unforgettable to him. Echo Kai, no rank, no nation, no insignia, just one line he whispered, and the war ended that night. Renek sat alone, and for the first time since the war, he wrote a personal entry. Not as a soldier, not as a tactician, but as a witness. They do not go to war because they are afraid of what they can do to others. They do not go to war because they are afraid of what they must become to win. And when they do go to war, they do not fight enemies. They fight themselves. Unbreakable oath the galaxy began to breathe again, but the air was not the same. It carried something heavier, invisible, but felt. Across every species, across every ship, across every council chamber that ever debated the price of peace. Delegates spoke in softer tones, warlords sat with quieter hands, and even the merchants, who once sold weapons as if they were fruit, now hesitated. Before signing their next deal, they all remembered Earth and what it became, and more importantly what it refused to become again. New Summit was called this time, not to fight, not to demand, but to offer a seat to Earth, a permanent one. To lead the United Alliance of Systems, a role once coveted by the most powerful species, now handed to the one that walked away from power, not out of weakness, but out of memory. Invitation was sent with ceremony and caution, encrypted and sealed. With 7 layers of security, a gesture of respect and fear and hope combined. Earth responded days later, not with a parade, not with a fleet, not with a celebration, but with one ship, the Solace, returning from the folds of space, once more gliding silently into orbit above the Alliance headquarters on Epsilon. Thornagillin stepped out alone, dressed in the same plain ambassador robes, no medals, no weapons, no entourage, just his presence, and that was enough to silence a crowd of billions. Grand Hall was packed. Every species in the Alliance presence screens hovered with translations running in over 400 languages. But none of it was needed as Yalin walked to the center and faced the leaders who had once questioned him, who had once doubted him, who now waited for a word they could believe in. He stood there for a long moment, then he spoke. You offer us leadership, but leadership built on fear is not peace, it is control, and we did not fight for control. A few murmurs. None dared interrupt. You ask us to lead you to peace, but peace cannot be given. It must be chosen, and we cannot choose it for you. Looked around, and his voice lowered but grew deeper. What you saw in the war, what you saw from the echoes, was not our strength, it was our failure. It was a memory of what happens when we stop listening to the part of us that cries before we strike. Paused and raised one hand to the air, and from it projected a scene not of battle, not of death, but of Earth. As it is now, a child planting a tree, a family building a home without walls, 2 people once enemies holding hands at a monument that bore no flags. This is our weapon now, he said, and it is not forged in fire, but in choice. The leaders sat still. Offer still open, the question still unanswered. Then the Yuvani scholar, the same one who had once asked why Earth had not destroyed its weapons, stood and asked again with new eyes, if not to lead, then what will you offer? Jalin turned to her and replied, we will offer our memory, we will offer our warning, and we will offer our oath. A new seal appeared above him, spinning slowly, a ring of stars around a single silent planet. It was not a flag. It was a symbol, and its meaning echoed across the chamber. We will never strike first, we will never provoke war, we will never trade in fear. But if the stars burn again, and if no one else can stop the fire, we will return, and if we return, it will not be as rulers, it will not be as saviors, it will be as the last voice that says enough. The chamber erupted not in applause, but in stillness, a moment of shared breath of understanding that what Earth had given was not command, but a gift, an unbreakable oath made by those who know the true cost. Renik stood near the back, eyes lowered, his mind echoing the words not as a soldier, but as a witness to the promise. After the summit, Yalin returned to solace the echoes, still silent, still watching the stars without speaking, as if waiting for something deeper. Then orders something eternal inside the ship. One young echo asked a question that lingered longer than any speech. Will they remember? Jilin looked out at the stars and answered softly, only if we remind them, not with war, not with silence, but with how we live between both. And solace rose once more, vanishing into the folds of space, a shadow of a promise not to be forgotten. The final lesson of Earth. The stars had quieted, the wars had faded, the wounds of the galaxy still bled, but they bled slower, now softer, now with hands reaching out instead of claws, striking down systems once divided by borders now shared. trade food memory, even song, and across the galaxy, there was one question still whispered by children, by soldiers, by leaders, in the quiet hours when peace felt too fragile to last. Do humans cry before battle? That question reached a school on the Outer Rim, a learning hall built on the floating cliffs of Zather Prime, where alien children of every species studied together under a dome of crystal sky beneath the ever-changing auroras of their world. One student was young, her name a Melody. In the Yuvani tongue, her skin pale silver, her eyes like mirrored oceans. She had grown up hearing the stories of Earth, of the echoes of the war that ended everything, and yet no one ever answered the question, so she asked it herself during an open forum, as tradition allowed, when students could pose questions to visiting elders, scholars, warriors, and diplomats. One question each, and hers echoed across the chamber. Why do humans cry before battle? The speaker that day was not a general, not a historian, not even a politician. He was an old man in simple robes, seated among the crowd, unknown until that moment, his face weathered not by time but by the weight of memory. He stood slowly, his hands behind his back, his gaze kind but heavy, and when he spoke, it was not to impress, it was to share. We cry before battle because we remember, he said, not just what we lose, but what we become to win. The room fell silent, even the walls seemed to listen. We were not always like this. Once we fought for pride, for soil, for flags that changed shape and meaning with every generation. We built weapons faster than cures. We taught children to march before they could read, and we praised those who returned, broken over those who never went. He turned to the girl, his eyes soft and endless. But then came a war that did not end with victory, only with absent cities, gone names, erased families, unmade not by enemy hands, but by our own. We built monsters in labs and called them defense. We unleashed storms upon ourselves and called it strength. And when the last fire died, the last bullet fell, we stood among ruins and found no one left to blame. Girl blinked, her voice smalls. Oh, you stopped fighting? No, he replied, we changed how we fight. We chose to fight for life, for peace, for each other. And we swore to bury the part of us that hungered for war so deep that even our own bones would forget. He walked toward the center of the room and raised a hand. A small projection appeared, a child standing on earth in front of a grave. No name, no symbol, just a flower placed in silence. This child is not trained to kill. They are taught to build, to care, to cry. And yet if ever they must defend, they will do so not as a soldier, not as a weapon, but as a final voice against darkness. And when that day comes, they will cry first, because they know what follows. He looked at every student, every teacher, every listener. We cry not from fear, but from memory, because every tear reminds us that we are not meant to destroy, we are meant to protect, and sometimes the cost of that protection is to become what we fear most. Another student, older, asked, then why not destroy the power? You still hold the weapons, the knowledge, the darkness, because he said if we destroy it, we pretend it never existed, and forgetting is how it begins again. We do not keep the darkness to use it, we keep it to remember it, to teach others to fear it, as we do. Turned to leave, but the girl stepped forward, one last question in her heart. Will we ever become like humans? The old man smiled, not with pride, but with hope. If you are lucky, you will never have to, and if you are wise, you will learn before you must. Walked out into the evening light of Zather Prime, his steps slow but sure, his shadow long against the sky, and behind him the children sat in silence, not out of fear, but out of understanding. For the first time, they did not see humans as warriors or myths or monsters. They saw them as survivors of a war that never ended within. And high above, in the orbit of a quiet planet, the ship Solace floated, still carrying those who had seen what lies beyond war, and chose to turn back, not for glory, not for power, but for the simple hope that one day no child would have to cry before battle. The end.